Hello, welcome, and guten Morgen from Germany. My name is
Hello,
Chris
everybody.
Hanna. I'm the CEO and founder of the Esports Observer, and you've just tuned into today's webinar, which is brought to you by Sports Business Journal, the Esports Observer, and our partners at Nielsen. We're going to talk about the ROI of esports brand integrations, tools to exposure in venue and in game. For this purpose, I brought you Michael Heiner, the international head of esports for EMEA and APAC at Nielsen Sports. And believe it or not, it's his birthday today. And he might have thought I forgot it. I did not. I just wanted to tell you in front of everyone. Congratulations, Michael, and
Thanks.
thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So just very quick housekeeping for today. So there is going to be a presentation, and if we've done our homework right, you'll already see the cover page. You can ask questions through the tool. Please be aware that we got a lot of questions up front. So, flexible as we are, Michael already integrated most of them into the presentation. So if you have further questions, during the presentation, if you have very specific things you want to ask about certain slides, submit your questions. Please give him time to run through the presentation. The link to the webinar will be sent to everyone right after the webinar is concluded. And it will, of course, be distributed by the Esports Observer, by Sports Business Journal, and by Nielsen. So with this, I would hand it over to Michael and let you start educating us on things.
Thanks, Chris. So, hello, good afternoon, good morning, everybody, from wherever you are tuning in. As Chris already said, we will be talking about the ROI of esports brand integration today. And without further ado, let's jump into things because I brought lots of stuff with me today. So as always, you know how things are. A quick introduction about who is Nielsen Sports and esports, what are we doing, and why can I tell you the things that I will be telling you in a couple of minutes. After that, we really jump into things and look into generating exposure in esports. So how do you do this? What are really good cases that we have seen in the past? And we also, we asked you already some questions in the before the webinar. So as Chris already said, we integrated almost all of them already into the presentation, but we will have this a bit interactive. So we will have polls throughout the presentation. You will get a very easy to recognize visual hint when it's time to poll, and I'm really super excited to see what you guys will be voting for, especially when we talk about exposure in esports, and then later on when we are talking about how to measure the holistic ROI of esports partnerships. There are some things that we need to go into more detail into. So let's start into things now. So just quick about Nielsen Sports and Nielsen Esports. Who are we? So as you may know, Nielsen is the world's largest market research and media research company with almost 40,000 employees all around the globe. In more or less every country, we do have offices. And from the sports side of things, we also have like 1,500 employees all around the globe. And some of those employees, like me, are doing esports analysis full time. What does it mean? So being Nielsen means that we are neutral. So we work with all the participants, independent if it's in the media world or in the sports world or in the esports world. We don't judge. We work with everybody. So like with game publishers, brands, leagues and teams, media companies, agencies, and of course traditional sports. All those participants of the esports world, we treat equally and work with all of them with the data sets that we can provide, with audience measurement, with media evaluations, with brand equity studies, and so on and so on and so on. We will talk about those things that we do a bit later because we implemented lots of data that we have in this webinar. But just to start with what we will be talking about today. So from our perspective, if you look into esports, we all should be aware that gaming and esports per se is not the same. Of course, gaming is the broader mass, and I really like the analogy of seeing gaming and esports as an iceberg. The iceberg floats in the water, and the tip of the iceberg that is floating above the water, that's esports. Esports is part of gaming. But if you now look into the target groups that consume or produce gaming / esports, we from our perspective see a threefold differentiation here. So at first, of course, let's look into gamers. Gamers like to play video games themselves. I mean, come on, that's why they are called gamers. But the thing is, watching passively other people play computer games is for them absolutely not important. They want to play themselves. And if you compare those target group with the general population in the countries that we analyzed, you see that gamers per se have a higher share of males and that they are slightly younger than the average population. If we now switch to esports fans, I mean, come on, we all know that esports fans also have a high share of gamers, even higher than amongst the gamers. But the thing is, they really like watching other people play computer games. So the passive consumption of other people playing, now, is this only video game related content, or is it really esports? We define this as watching esports broadcasts and not following your favorite game streamer. So really like the sporting competition that is happening. That's the main difference, and that is one of the main differentiators. If we now look into the demographics, of course, we see that esports fans also have a very high share of males, and are also much younger than the average population, but they also have a very high educational level. So from a target group perspective, this makes them, especially for brands, super interesting. So one thing that we discovered, especially this year, and that's why I said we have a threefold differentiation of those target groups, we also have virtual sports. Many people that are new to esports think, okay, yeah, that's FIFA and Madden and NBA 2K and the like. Well, no. From a perspective, if you look into prize money and hours watched, so into the viewership, virtual sports is not a very important part of esports. Those is more a gaming thing. And as we saw now with COVID, that the virtual sports target group, they have a very high share of traditional sports fans, that because everything was on pause, they tuned into FIFA or NHL broadcasts or whatsoever and watched that. And especially, of course, sim racing, which if you have any winners during the pandemic, sim racing is surely one of those. The target group here really resembles the traditional sports target group. So they are not necessarily gamers, but they are more really interested in the game that is being broadcasted here and is the virtual copy of the actual game. So without further ado, now jumping into how do you really generate exposure in esports? What you have to keep in mind is esports from a broadcasting perspective differs from traditional sports. You have a different setup, because if you look into traditional sports, you have most of the time the game that is being played, and you have then if you look into football / soccer, you have advertisement boards in the back, and you have several other advertisement tools like cam carpet next to the goals and stuff like this, and of course also jerseys, and they all win during the actual playing time, so when the game is happening. In esports, this is slightly changing, but what you have to do is you have to come up with other ways, because the in-game branding is just starting now. So you have to come up with other ways to include your brand message or to include your partners into a stream. So what to start with are the broadcasters. So we have several so-called TVGI, television graphical inserts, into streams like lower thirds, screen takeovers, overlays, and so on. And what I really personally like very much is event-triggered brand integration. So like the Baron Power Play that the LEC and of course Riot Games with the Worlds now is using heavily. And I think that's a very clever way for a brand to be integrated, because you show that you understand the game and what's happening, that you're just not there for the exposure, but that you want to bring something back. So keeping in mind this, we have this overlays that are integrated into the broadcast stream. Then you have, of course, in-venue, which, to be honest, doesn't differ that much from any traditional sports in-venue brand integration that we see. Equipment now, that differs a bit from what we see from traditional sports. I mean, sports manufacturers in esports are not Adidas or Puma or Nike. Those are Logitech, HyperX, and so on and so on. Because without a headset or without a keyboard or without even the CPU of a computer, you won't be able to play your game. So that's why they are the manufacturers, and that's why equipment also is branded. And then coming to apparel, I mean, of course, if you are a team sponsor, the way of exposure that we have is being on the jersey. And last but not least, I already covered this slightly, but we will talk about this a bit more later on. You also have the opportunity to be in game, not only with virtual sports game, where it's like naturally that you can be on advertisement boards or on or under ice with ice hockey. Riot Games is doing this too, but again, we will come to this a bit later. So as I said, it's very easy to see when it's time for a poll, and so it's now. If you think about it, what do you think? What is the best tool for generating exposure in esports? And please vote now. As you saw, we have several tools that you that you can choose from and that are generating exposure. Will be interesting to see what you guys think. What is the best tool for generating exposure in esports? I'll give you a couple of more seconds so that you can thoroughly think what you think is the best tool. I'm really excited.
We do have a winner. The winner is with 64%. It's in game, and you have 24% TVGI, and there's 12% Team Jersey. So we have a clear winner, which is in game.
Well, that's interesting, because if you now look what we found with I have an overlay now which I can't get rid of. I just close it. Okay, so if we now look into what we saw and what we found with a typical offline event, to be honest, there hasn't been that much in-game branding, because, as I said, it's rather new. I mean, there have been already tries in the past, but what we saw here in this event, there hasn't been any in-game activation. So what we saw is clearly the winner here is TVGI heavily, because we have so many in-stream assets that that the brands have been using, that this was the clear winner. When we talk about in-game branding, I will tell you a bit more about how this could change in the near future. But looking into, again, TVGI is the best tool that you have in terms of generating exposure. But also, since we're talking about an offline event, you should never forget that all the tools that you have within an arena, stadium, or within your studio, when you do a broadcast, they all have exposure too. So like the stage or LED boards on stage. And if you have the broadcasters, that you have then signages when you have the talent talking, that you have also the desk branded with your partners. I mean, of course, that is really pushing it to the limit in terms of brand integration, because you should not do too much. But still, those are all clever ways how to integrate your partners into the stream. And how this has been done, we see if we look into the example from Kia, who is sponsoring the LEC. They have been main partner since 2018, and they have more than 10 visible on-screen assets, which are visible during different stages of the broadcast. But the thing is, 88% of their exposure is driven by 4 main assets, as you can see here on screen. They are mostly driven by brand and logo integration, not taking into account in-game integration. This is only the TV GI integration, which we already talked about. And I already discussed this briefly. If you look into shoulder content, which is everything like pick and ban phase in League of Legends, or post-match follow-ups and so on. This is the shoulder content, and this equals 44% of total exposure. So you get some exposure during the game, but pre-post game, don't forget this. This is also where it happens. Talking about, as I already said, that you also can be seen during an offline event. So let's have a look at Vodafone, which has been partnering at ESL's I Am Katowice. And I really like the arena branding that the guys did there. I mean, the whole arena is in Vodafone red. You can really see that Vodafone took over the moment here, and really did a brilliant job together with ESL to integrate their brand here. The thing is, if you now look into value generation, and we already saw that arena assets also generate exposure, 30% of the value coming out for Vodafone out of IEM Katowice came out of arena brandings. And this is something to keep in mind. I know during COVID and so on, it's quite difficult to be really in an arena and stuff like this, and to have this large integrations like ESL is doing here. But why not learn from the best of the best like ESL is doing here, and why not copy this, but use it as a starting point. And again, 30% of Vodafone's QI media value, which we will be covering later, came out of this branding here. So the thing is, if we have a big arena, as we just saw, it gives you different ways how you can integrate your brand. But also one of the main, and I mean from a sporting perspective, the most important thing is to integrate the teams. And what I really liked here is how the LEC work together with their team partners to really increase the share that the teams have in terms of exposure. 36% of all on-screen exposure that is being generated comes from the teams, and that is quite good. They even put some thought into it. How can we adjust the camera angle to give our team partners more exposure? How can we integrate the teams with the jerseys better during pre-game introductions and so on, during post-game interviews? All this is something that comes, of course, from professional traditional sports leagues, and has been beautifully adapted here in the esports world, again, to give teams really the opportunity to integrate themselves a bit better and to have exposure for their own team's partners. But what does it mean in terms of a jersey? We already talked about the best ways of generating exposure. In-game, yes, it will come in a couple of seconds. But first, if we think about the jersey, many people that are not like already 20 years into esports think of jerseys in the traditional way. And this is the traditional way is, well, like football/soccer here as an example. You have the jersey front, which is super important. You have the sleeve, which like 2 or 3 years now is also very important for marketing. And of course, during the live match, you see those advertisement tools quite good. But always keep in mind, those are also multipliers, because if you look into newspapers or social media posts or whatsoever, or online media, you mostly see really the people with the players with the jersey, and no one wants to see just a screenshot from a stadium where you don't see anything at all. You want to see action. And that's why those pictures also are social multipliers in the traditional sports world. Esports now, as we already talked about, is a bit different. And again, it's time for a poll, guys. What do you think? If you now look into a jersey, what are the best slots on the players' jerseys? I'm super excited now to see what you guys think, because when I know what we found out, and I know what the common opinion amongst most people in esports is, so I'm really excited to see what you guys will be voting for.
And while we're collecting the votes, like, we just want to chime into something that you said earlier about the integration with Vodafone. Like, if you're in that arena and the whole thing turns red and like every screen has a logo, I really found that was a powerful integration. And I'm a former Vodafone employee, so I really get the feels of this. So I think it's crazy. It's there's no way you cannot see.
Exactly, and this is what sponsorship is about. It's it of course gives you exposure, but the one thing that many people always forget is that it also should in some way touch you emotionally, because when, as you said, Chris, when you were there, you could really feel what was happening, this takeover taking place now. So let's see what we got from the jersey. That's too far. Let's stay here.
We got a 45% shoulder front.
Okay.
And we got a 32% front, followed by 12% of the back. Then there's 8% sleeve and 3% shoulder back. So we do have an educated or smart audience.
Absolutely brilliant, and kudos to all of you, because this is exactly more or less what we found out if we looked into players' jerseys. So guys, I don't have to go into details because you know already this, but as you can see, our data truly backs up what you were thinking, and the back really is not the most valuable part like many people thought in the past. So before talking really about exposure types like in-game exposure, and I chose to highlight Riot Games brand integration here, one thing that I always want to talk about when talking about exposure, that many people think of this ways of brand integration just slapping your logo somewhere as Stone Age marketing. Well, it's not Stone Age marketing, because the way how people perceive things and the ways how sponsorship works is because of exposure. You can't let a sponsorship solely work on its own by generating exposure and then doing nothing with it. But this is the first step. This is how you get people's attention, even though they don't really realize that you are generating that the brand is generating exposure. And that's the beauty of sponsorship, because it has a very high acceptance amongst the fans. And we all hate commercial breaks. Well, in times traditional television was still a thing. When you were watching a movie and then a commercial break went on, and you just got kicked out of the action in this moment. Sponsorship doesn't do this. It is there, it is passive, and that's why it's not intrusive. And that's the brilliance about it, that this first step of generating exposure, I'm not saying that this is all you need. This is only the first step, but it's the needed step to get people's attention, even passively. So talking about the in-game, yeah, I'm totally with you guys on that this is, well, actually a game changer, because in the past, as we have been already discussing, the shoulder content was the thing where brands could be integrated the easiest, and without TVGI, there was no way how you really could integrate them. Riot Games now choose a very smart way to integrate their brand partners, as you can see here with Alienware and Kia being on flags, and we have some other tools that also are being used. This is not too much. And this is still passive, because it's not like the champions are being branded themselves. I think this would be crossing a line, but this, the way how Riot Games did it here, is really very clever. The thing is, with in-game branding, DOTA, so the ESL also does this within DOTA, and they have this on the floor, and of course on banners and flags and so on. The thing with in-game integration now is you are part of the game, and when somebody uses a spell, like you can see in the lower picture below, your brand integration can just vanish because you're part of the game. So that's the thing with in-game integration. You have a good integration, but this can vanish in just a second. So if you're now looking into what does this now mean for brand partners? What does this now mean if I'm sponsoring, and how do I calculate this into an ROI? You have to keep 4 things in mind that you always should take into the equation here. At first, exposure. We talked about this, so I will briefly touch now how this can be translated into a value for you and your brand partners, or for you as a brand. Of course, the other thing is brand impact. If you send a signal out somewhere, which you're doing with exposure and sponsorship, and of course with activations with the players, with the teams, or with the talent or whatsoever, you want to impact your brand. How can you measure this, and how can this then be integrated into a holistic ROI? Keep in mind that we also have engagement with the digital campaigns or offline campaigns or whatsoever, and that's really the toughest KPI that you can measure: business impact. We will cover this only a bit. So let's start, of course, with exposure here, which we covered now. I've been already talking about the QI media value, but what does it mean? Media value means that we measure for you what would you as a brand have to invest in traditional advertisement to get the exposure you get by being seen in the stream or being integrated in the game. Back in the days, we have used the so-called 100% media equivalency value. What does it mean? That means that we said back in the days, really like more than 10 years ago, okay, you have a sponsorship logo on an advertising board or on a TV GI. This is the same like having a 30-second advertising spot where you have a storyboard, where you have actors, where you can play with emotion, where you have even sound and so on. And we all know, come on, this is just not the same. So we came up with the world's leading methodology how to really measure the on-screen exposure. How do we do this? We do this in traditional sports. We do this also with music and other entertainment, and we do this with esports. So the beauty of it is we can compare all this to each other because we use the same methodology. We always look into how large is the logo being seen on screen, where is the logo being seen on screen, how long consecutively is the logo being seen on screen, and how many of your own brand hits are being seen simultaneously. If you now think again of this Vodafone example, because they have so many different tools they're using in one moment, you can really feel the takeover by Vodafone, and that is really what counts in the second. So this is how we come from exposure to measuring the QI score, and then of course coming up with values attached to this by knowing the CPM of the program and the AMA of the program. What does it mean now? If you now look into last year's events calendar, and we picked some events that we analyzed with our esports 24 database. League of Legends Worlds came to a accumulated media value of between 20 to 25 million US dollars here, which is really huge. That's a lot of media value for the different brands that have been integrated there. And of course, also the teams that have been playing there generated media value for their brand partners. Now looking into what IEM Katowice had, or ESL1 Cologne, or the international and stuff like this, you can see that there still are a lot of media value being generated. So this is the first step that you should take to think about how can you measure what you have been doing in terms of on-screen, and how can this be then translated into media value. Always keeping in mind, offline event signage also can be translated here into a media value. As I already said, sending a signal out somewhere is only one part. What we want to do is always impact people with sponsorship. So what we did here is we did an analysis for the Overwatch League and looked into, all right, if you have to name any esports sponsor, who are those? This is the really toughest measure that you can have in sponsorship, the unaided sponsorship awareness. You really have just the really have just a box where you have to enter whatever brand comes to mind. And we benchmarked the results now with sports naming rights norm, so naming rights from stadiums where you invest heavy dollars into it, and sports tier 1 norm, meaning jersey sponsorships. And we took the normal partners from Overwatch League here as a comparison, as a benchmark. And what you can see is the average level of mentions unaided with the Overwatch League partners here was 31%. The naming rights norm now in sports is 27%. So if you now think about the investment that you have to take to own a stadium, quotes on and off, that is a bit more than you have to invest when you are an Overwatch League partner. But still, the unaided sponsorship awareness is higher amongst the partners here. And sports tier 1 norm, so the jersey sponsorship, is really far away from this. The delta here has 25% points, and that's quite a lot. If you now look into the aided sponsorship awareness, meaning you have a list where you can choose from, of course, this is like an elevator effect. Everything gets elevated a bit, but the sports naming rights overtakes a bit, but only by 3% points in comparison to the Overwatch League partners. So you can still see this is a huge sponsorship recall. So what does it mean? Recall is only one side, of course. The other side that you have to take into account is, what does this actually mean for the brand? Sponsorship works, and you can see it here. All three sponsorship types are working in terms of brand favorability, which is the calculation we do, and it impacts more or less the same. But you can still see that if you think about how many people really are aware of Overwatch League partners here, that this is a really good positive impact all this had. And one thing that I always want to keep in mind, that you remember this, and the data that we have globally for the APAC region, for instance, is exactly the same. It's even more positive than we see here. Is people in esports are reacting positive towards sponsorship because they, as we already talked about, they are intelligent. They have a very high educational level, and that's why they understand that sponsors bring money to the table, which enables the tournament organizers, the teams, and of course the players to compete on the highest levels there are. Just one thing on the side, if we look into traditional sports, the positiveness that we can see here is not as high. It doesn't have this positive sentiment. One thing that I already mentioned is, okay, so we have exposure on the one side, which is the necessary first step in sponsorship to make people aware of you, but you have to make your sponsorship come alive with clever activations, with a good content strategy. I mean, not listed on the slide here, but if you think about the awesome campaign by DHL that they did with EffieBot integrated into DOTA 2, I mean, the sky's the limit. If you talk to publishers or to your to the tournament organizer, or if you are yourself a rights holder, and think about, so what can we do with our brand partners? There are so many ways how you can integrate them into very good campaigns. And again, this is then how the whole thing comes alive. And looking back into the ROI, you can measure this as well, of course. And out of every engagement, there is, of course, a value coming attached to this that we can take into this equation here. One thing that I mentioned in the beginning, which is a bit complicated and would take like another 2 hours to just scratch on the surface, is the business impact. The business impact of things can be funneled down to the impact it has on your brand by brand awareness, opinion towards your brand consideration. Are you the first choice amongst the esports fans in your brand category? And this all can be translated into an impact, which can also be taken into the equation here. But basically, what you always should consider if you think about the holistic ROI in esports and in any other sponsorship, so esports doesn't really differ here from any other sponsorship. You have the broadcast that is being broadcasted, you have your tangible impact that you can measure, as we already talked about, exposure, media value, engagement rates, media value coming out of social media campaigns and the like. And you can have this on the one hand. On the other hand, you have your brand impact, which, as we already saw now with the Overwatch League example, is how is your brand impacted by this? Does it have an impact? Does it even have maybe a negative impact? And so on. So if you all take this into account, again, business impact, we leave this out for now. You can generate this into a total value. And if you just divide this by your investment, you see that you have then your return on investment, or in this case, the return on sponsorship investment based on the exposure that you get combined with the brand impact that you have. And then you see, is it +1 or maybe even -1, which nobody really wants to have. So for the last time, we will now hand it over to you guys and see what ROI do you expect from a sponsorship in esports. As I said before, I'm again super excited to see what you guys will think is a valid ROI for sponsorship integration into esports. So giving you just another couple of seconds to again thoroughly think through.
We need a drum roll.
Yeah, so something like this. Well, I have my drum kit right there. I can try.
So you can do this. Could be, you know, would be interactive. Yeah. I also heard you studied a dance that you wanted to perform in the end.
Yeah. I'm all ballroom dancing, but my wife isn't here, so ballroom dancing by myself is like.
So let's give it another 10 seconds here, and then you know we can see. You brought comparisons, right?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. So we have 44% is 3-1 to 5-1.
Okay.
And there is 28% 6-1 to 8-1, and we do have 13% greater than 10-1, followed by 8-10, and 6% is only less than 3-1. So people do believe in a good return, I feel.
And that's good. If you now compare this, what you guys said, with the general industry standard, you just really nailed it. So what most marketeers expect from their sponsorship is like a 3-to-1 ROI return. So this is more or less over all sponsorship activities that you can do, from traditional sports over music to even culture. This is what people expect to get back from. What we found out with our holistic valuations that we did, and we used the methodology described before, European football ratio is approximately 5-1. This is what we see in terms of sponsorship return. And if you now look into a bit the broader landscape of sponsorship, not only football but also handball, hockey, ice hockey, rugby, and so on, we see that we even have a 6-to-1 ROI for those. Now you ask yourself, okay, he's been talking about traditional stuff now, so what about esports? What we see now is still 10-to-1 return in many cases, but to be honest, the days of 52 or 38-to-1 returns in esports are over here too. And I mean, if you get as a brand a result of 38-to-1, you can really feel that there's maybe something strange going on. So those days might be over, but still, esports outranks traditional sports in very many different ways, as we already saw throughout the presentation. And especially if you take everything into account, ROI-wise, esports is a very good tool that you can use. So that's all from the presentation. And again, we already covered lots of questions that you guys had sent us before this. So Chris, coming to the Q&A session, and did people post some questions during
Oh
the
yeah.
deck?
Oh yeah. We have and I do have more questions. So if you want, you can also remove the presentation so people can see you better. But I do have questions, and I'm going to ask you a couple of them. You can always feel free to not comment if you want to. So, just in case. But basically, and I want to really touch on what you just said last, right? So we're talking about esports returns. You mentioned there's still like a, sometimes a 10 to 1 kind of return on things. When we talk about these big returns, right? How do you feel about the future? Like, what ROI trends can you see?
Especially with the in-game branding that we already discussed during the presentation. I think that in a more short term, the ROI will increase, because you now get exposure during a time where you usually didn't have any exposure. So that is pretty good. And I mean, it does mean that within Counter-Strike this isn't possible. It's totally possible, and it has been tried in the past with not that really positive reactions from coming out of the target group. But I think they should be given some time to adjust. Maybe seeing like a Coke logo with a graffiti on a container on Mirage or whatsoever. So there are still some ways that we can go to with an esports sponsorship. But again, the thing is, in comparison to some traditional sports, esports isn't that cluttered. We have a clear structure. We have spots where we can integrate partners here, and within game, we are more or less at a threshold which we shouldn't cross now, because it would be too much. But again, as a trend, this is something really big that brand partners can really look into positively.
So, and I mentioned this when you were gone. Like, what can a small brand do? We've seen all the big activations. We're talking about Vodafone taking over, all of Katowice, basically in the arena. You showed Fortnite, like you've seen all that stuff. I mean, I can't afford that. My pockets are not deep enough. So if I'm on a smaller budget, like how can I engage with esports? Like, what can companies do that are on a tighter budget? And on that note, and probably let's start with that, if you can comment on this. Like, do you have an idea of average ticket sizes? Like, what's the sponsorship? Like, what kind of range is a Vodafone sponsors ESL full takeover at IEM Katowice? Like, what are we talking about? And what can people do who don't have that amount of money?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, this is far more than just 10K. You don't get the full arena in Katowice for 10K. Maybe for a second, but that's not really not enough. If you're looking into the real global brand partners from the big ones like ESL or even Riot Games partners that are sponsoring globally, you are really here in a range where you also could engage with a traditional sponsorship in sports, like a jersey sponsorship in the Bundesliga. But keeping in mind, you then have one tool within one type of sports in one national league. You don't have this global exposure like you get in esports.
Can you drop a number? Just so like our range, just so somebody heard some number.
Yeah, it's definitely a 7-digit what you have to invest if you want to be a really sustainable big partner. And I think this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, because you get lots of different tools, lots of ways to play with your brand integration, lots of stuff you can activate with. So it's it's not a bargain, but it's a really good value for money, to be honest. And if you now look into brands that don't have aren't this global, or don't want to invest that type of money, you always can go to like a streamer, or to a team, and or to a smaller scale team. Grassroots is something where you can engage with this type of money with 10K, going to like where before they were a team to MadeCrate, who were trying to organize local League of Legends leagues that were based in towns, so that you could have like a really local league for you in your city. this is really where you can engage. But again, keeping in mind, what do you want to achieve? This is always the question that you should ask yourself in the beginning. If I spend 10K, how should this money be invested, and what do I expect from it as a return? Is it just for me like media spending, which you definitely shouldn't look at it this way? Is it something that I see like a donation, or is there something that I want to bring to the table to a smaller tournament, to a smaller team, and help them develop and maybe bet on the future? And if they really like qualify for an ESL1 in Cologne, or an ESL1 in Birmingham or whatsoever, and are able to compete with the big ones, then you have a really good ROI coming out of this.
Yeah. So I have a few more questions here, and I'm gonna start with, we're talking about exposure, right? So how can brands use casters? Do you think brands can use casters? Is it helpful to use casters? Like, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, they definitely can, but this is not something like with in-stream integration. You can use casters with what we already talked about, like having a logo on the caster's desk or whatsoever. But if you look into Shocks, I wouldn't think that she is not willing to sign an endorsement deal with your brand. I mean, this is then again where it comes more to we are moving a bit away from sponsorship, but more looking into engaging with streamers or engaging with endorsement deals. Then, and the methodology here, or the tools that you can use, they do not really differ in what brands are already doing with streamers and the like, or with other creative campaigns. So from my perspective, that is definitely something that that should be kept in mind and should definitely be used, because they
What is
just one sorry Chris, just one last thing, because most of them have a huge followership. And not going into too much and talking about this, but you saw how they reacted towards a certain sponsorship deal that has been signed in the last couple of weeks, and that they have power, those casters. They immediately said, well, no, this is not nothing for us, we are out. And if you use them for your brand in a credible way, that's always the case. You have to make them feel comfortable with what you want to communicate them with and for. Then you have a really good tool to use.
Okay, cool, thank you. So the other thing that came in is, how do you feel about jerseys? And I want to talk about in-game jerseys. Like you mentioned this basically in traditional sports. We looked at jersey advertisement. We see this in esports. You also mentioned how Riot Games is adjusting like camera angles so you can see more sponsorships on the jersey, but that's players outside, right? And they're typically, you can see them in interviews, but they're typically small during gameplay. In gameplay, you see characters though. And how do you feel about skins, like kind of sponsored skins? Is that a good way? And what comes to mind immediately for me is FIFA, where you can see this. But then also I think about the Louis Vuitton integration Riot Games did, where you as a brand can all of a sudden have a Louis Vuitton skin in game. Is that driving, like, do you feel it's driving a lot of attention and awareness for Louis Vuitton?
Yeah, it definitely has, because a really aspiring brand like Louis Vuitton, well, I'm not aspiring to own a bag, but my wife heavily is pushing me. So there are people really aspiring to own their products, and getting into the minds of the target group here is a very clever way of doing this. In terms of esports, I don't think we should go that far and have like Master Yi coming up with a branded skin that he's wearing inside the game. I don't know, because we already have lots of integration, and I'm not saying this can't be tried in the future, but as I already said, we are nearing the border of credibility and overfreighting, and we shouldn't have too much integrated into the esports. I mean, if you play yourself, and that's then the broader gaming aspect, and again, we are targeting much more people with gaming. That's a clever way of doing this. This is integrating yourself into the game again in a credible way, because you are in game, you are giving something back here, and you really feed this aspiring aspect, and you bring your brand nearer to your future customers. So that's a good thing to do. But again, this is not really like sponsorship. This is more from a licensing / brand integration department standpoint.
So that's another question, and it's just, I guess, asking for a summary because you provided a lot of input on this, and it's a lot to digest. But can you just quickly summarize, like as Nielsen Sports, then, like how do you evaluate sponsorships? Like, what is it exactly you look at? And I guess that plays into QI. But if you can just wrap this up like in 1 or 2 sentences pretty quickly, so high level.
So as a quick wrap up, the 2 pillars that you always should look into are the traditional evaluation standpoints from sponsorship. First one, you send a signal out. We talked about exposure, on-screen exposure, even activation exposure, activations. You can all measure this, and you can all attach a dollar sign to this. So this is the first pillar you should base your valuation on. It's a really valuation monetary wise. And on the other hand, you have something that happens in people's minds. The intangible part, you should always keep this in mind too, as we already discussed with this Overwatch example. Is your brand being perceived as a sponsor in esports? How does it work? How does the brand perception change because you are a sponsor? So these are the 2 main pillars that you always definitely should take into account: media valuation, market research. Combine those 2, then you have a full package. If you want to start, look into media valuation, because then you see, are you being seen on screen? Is something happening? And then definitely take the next step and look into what is happening with your brand because you are a sponsor.
Okay, so here's one a little bit more in depth.
All right.
You talked. So basically, you talked about unaided awareness, and we talked about brand recognition and some of these things.
Mm.
And you mentioned naming rights, then compared to the Overwatch League sponsors. And so, I mean, there's a huge cost gap right now. And then, of course, and I just really want to clarify this, right? And I think we talked about this before as well. Like, there also is a huge difference in audience, though, right? So do you believe that the difference in audience has an impact on the return in terms of, a 10-1, 5-1, 3-1? Like, do you believe if esports had an as large audience, for example, as some of the other sponsorships, like it would get closer to it, or do you think it would still bring the return? Because I would assume that cost would increase as well, right? If the audience increases.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is just a natural way of evolving things. The more people you watch, the more eyeballs you reach, the more you can charge for your exposure-based sponsorships. And I mean, the more people tune in, the better it is for the whole industry. But you already said it. We are far away still with esports from the viewership global football has. Will we ever reach this? Honestly, I don't know. I don't think so, because football / soccer has like 60 years of development professional wise ahead of esports. But still, ROI wise, of course, we will see an increase of costs, but also an increase in viewership. So the ROI, if you are good in negotiating, will more or less then stay the same, but you reach more people.
And let's be real for a second, right? I mean, we talk about esports, and you just mentioned soccer or football, depending on where you live. But when you mentioned this, like we're still comparing like a full bucket of all disciplines, as esports. And a fair comparison would be, comparing the Overwatch League or comparing Overwatch and the Overwatch ecosystem, to soccer or football. Like I think, the one mistake that we see really often is people take esports as like just esports what it is. Nobody understands they have to differentiate the different disciplines, and then we're comparing a global industry to like one league in one sport in one country. And let's make sure that we look at the right things, and that's just advice.
Totally, Chris. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And just doing a bit of advertisement here, we had an article on the Esports Observer like last week where we covered exactly this. I mean, you have to look at you don't say I'm a sports sponsor. Yeah, what does it mean? Nothing, to be honest. So are you in soccer? Are you in handball? Are you in basketball? Whatsoever? You have to think about this, and from a strategy, you have to apply the same in esports. Do you want to become a Counter-Strike sponsor? Do you want to be more in League of Legends? Do you want to be more in StarCraft? So yeah, you have to choose whatever game type you want to choose. and also apply this to the country that you want to target. If you look into Japan, for instance, the more or less traditional games that we see that are topping the rankings in terms of interest in those different countries that we analyze, they just aren't in the top of the ranking in Japan. In Japan, you have to go with fighting games or generally anything that Konami puts out or Nintendo. So again, as you said, Chris, we have to see esports as an ecosystem that it is. So we have to differentiate between different types of esports that we have, and then, of course, apply this into different countries that all have a different ranking in terms of interest.
And I know that we agree on this. I just wanted to put it out to the audience just in case that, there's people who do this differently. So I have two, maybe three more questions I want to ask you. And so you mentioned the iceberg. You mentioned, esports as a tip of the iceberg. Then there's gaming, which, is casual gaming, kind of recreational gaming, like all of these kind of things.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that big brands do not aggressively pursue the grassroots esports segment, like talking about, the early time, like the path to pro, the zero to hero kind of story, where people start. I mean, there is stuff and there are sponsorships, but why don't brands pursue this more aggressively to position themselves?
Right. For starters, it's just not that developed yet. So grassroots is something. ESL is saying basically what you just said, and they have the claim now where everybody can be somebody, and that's true with ESL Play. You can rank up and then be discovered, perhaps, or even eventually, depending on how much time you invest. But besides this, really grassroots is not that established. Esports more or less has been born globally, but also more or less like professionally. So it's not has been something that the community has been playing, and it's been now developing into some kind of a triangle where you have the professional on top. It's more like the other way around. So grassroots is still something that needs to that needs to be funded, that needs up, but also needs to be brought to the different countries. So you have federations that are trying to do this. But that's the thing. If you want to become a grassroots esports sponsor, where do you go to? Where are the right sponsorship platforms for you? That's a tough one still. So you can be inventive and come up with your own grassroots grassroots thing. So like a German football club called Eintracht Frankfurt is doing with League of Legends. They have a grassroots team which is built up by their sponsors. Not all are from the traditional sports club. They even have their own esports sponsors. So you can engage, but you really have to search until you find something like this.
So there's one question that is basically also aiming at how does a brand build credibility, how is it authentic? And you mentioned already, right, there might be ways where you just naturally integrate it into what it does. So imagine you play PUBG, there's a store, and all of a sudden the store has, I don't know, a Coke fridge or something, right, or these kind of things. Do you have any other thoughts on this, like that come to mind immediately? I mean, it's a very heavy question, so we can't go in depth, but is there anything that you want to share?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the best example is DHL and DOTA. I mean, DHL delivers things. Yeah, we all know this. But how does this now come together with DOTA? Not really. But thinking about, okay, we have this cute Effibot that we can integrate, and they integrated this into the game where Effibot delivers things to the heroes in game. And then also they took this and used this as the base for their activations in the arena to use Effibot to deliver stuff. And then, I mean, again, if you think about what is your core business, DHL's core business is delivering. And so they delivered, and they delivered fun. They delivered. We know what we are doing because we integrated ourselves in the game. And this is how we have to approach things. And this is not only for esports. I mean, come on, if you are a sponsor in ice hockey, you have to do a different campaign than you would do for football. That's just the same thing. You have to think about what are you sponsoring, and that's why choose what you want to do.
And I love that you bring the DHL thing up, because I always show people the video, and there is a video that you can actually Google of a full arena chanting DHL because they love the activation so much. And I always think about, like, in what world does that really happen? because and I'm nothing against DHL, but it's a delivery company. You would not expect that kind of engagement, but it went completely crazy. So I really like that one.
And there's even a second one where you have like a countdown. You have the sponsorship rotation. ESL1 Birmingham is brought to you by Intel and so on. And then when DHL comes up and people know this, they are like then cheering and waiting. And then when DHL comes up, they are doing party. So that's really cool.
Last real question.
Yeah.
Let me just get this out because I really want to ask you this. So last week question is, you mentioned virtual sports and how you look at things, and you broke it into 3 pillars, which I can understand, and it does make sense. Virtual sports, clear winner of COVID for some period because sports came to a halt. You mentioned sim racing is a big winner. Are these things here to stay, or was this just like a trend because there was nothing else to watch?
Yeah. I also brought the same thing up. Was it just a gap filler because there was nothing else? So I think with sim racing, which is even in niche inside the esports niche, so to speak, yeah, it came to stay, so to speak. So I don't think it will go away. It won't attract like the millions of people like the real Formula One is really attracting. But still, you have a very decent target group size here and very engaged people. So this is something very interesting. And hell, I mean, when I watched some footage a couple of weeks ago, I really had to think: is this now the real thing, or is this the game? So Codemaster really did a hell of a job there with Formula One. Virtual sports, so like FIFA or NBA 2K and all the like, there you can still really feel that it's the copy of the actual game. I mean, I'm playing FIFA myself, so who am I to judge? But if you can choose between watching the real soccer game and then the virtual copy, I of course go for the real game. But you know, the thing with sim racing now is because it looks so real, and the drivers can risk more because they are not risking their lives if they just break like 10 milliseconds later than they usually would do. You see hell of more action. So that is really something that came and people are really enjoying. But again, all the other virtual sports, they are more from the gaming perspective to be analyzed and not really from the esports perspective.
Cool, thank you. Well, floor's yours. Where can people connect with you? How can I find more about all the stuff you just said? Like, give us all the plugs.
So of course, at first you can find myself on LinkedIn, where I guess most of you guys are also to be found. Then NIELSENESPORTS.com. If you go there, you can find lots of stuff that we give away for free in terms of our playbook for brands, where we analyzed how can a brand integrate themselves into the esports world. What are credible ways doing this? What are even values coming out of this? So these are the 2 main things that I would recommend to do. Again, ping me on LinkedIn, and hoping to talk to all of you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
The link's going to be sent like when we close this. I think we're there yet. Now, thanks everyone for watching. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. Always a pleasure, Michael. Good insights.
Absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure we're going to continue this conversation offline.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.